Hello, everyone. My name is Pil-Young Kim. I'm a professor in psychology at the University of Denver. So I study and teach the impact of AI, artificial intelligence, on human minds. And I also shared what I have learned from the literature and my own research here with you. So today, what I want to share with you is some insights that I gained from research that's been done in the field on the topic and the question whether stress can actually make us to over rely on AI. So this question was actually coming from my own research looking into the literature that what are different factors that might be related to the situations that make us to be more likely to rely on AI advice or AI suggestions for decision making rather than relying on our own independent thinking, right? So there could be many different factors that influence our tendency to rely on AI advice and AI suggestions for our own decision making. So some of those kind of factors might be related that we believe that AI's suggestions and information that AI provide to us is accurate. So that's definitely one factor. And the kind of other factors that can be also related to that is we also think that AI is interacting with us so human-like, providing the illusion that we can trust AI, just like how we can trust human. Also, we think that AI has access to lots of information, perhaps the information that more than how much information that us or human experts may have. So that's another factor. We could also believe that AI's decision or AI suggestions are based on algorithm that perhaps free of bias. So there's a lots of different factors that are related to the tendency that we might be actually relying on AI's suggestions for our decision. The one that I don't think has been really receiving a lot of attention, but I think we should pay attention, is this factor, the stress that we experience. When you ask people who uses ChatGPT regularly, they might actually say, oh, it's okay to use ChatGPT, especially for those that is very simple, very repetitive. So for example, like asking ChatGPT to check fluency of my email. I wrote the email and ChatGPT is going to just check the fluency of it, or maybe drafting an email that is just like simple and straightforward. So, for example, the study that was done this year with more than 300 workers who actually uses ChatGPT regularly for their work, a lot of them actually report and saying that they use ChatGPT regularly for these kind of simple, repetitive tasks. And they trust AI to do a pretty good job. Many of them reported to say that they don't really feel like they have to check ChatGPT's responses. The benefit of this would be then we let the AI to do this kind of low level, simple, repetitive work while we have more time to focusing on more complicated, more complex tasks that requires our own critical thinking more. So that's a great argument. However, I also see countering evidence that when the task is actually something that really requires our own deep, critical, independent thinking, because of that cognitive and emotional demands that task has, it may actually, in some ways, increasing the motivation to us to rely on AI suggestions more so, especially now that AI is providing impression to us that it is pretty highly capable of making even some really complex decisions. So let's kind of talk about it a little bit with the actual study finding that I think is quite relevant to this discussion. So the study that was conducted last year, and this study was done with US participants. The researchers have the participants engaged in pretty realistic kind of military scenario game, and the objectives of the game was to kill enemies while minimizing the casualties of the civilians. And during this task, the participants received advice and suggestions from robot. In this case, the generative AI wasn't directly involved in here, but the robot was giving advice to participants believed to have some type of AI capacity. And participants can decide whether they follow the AI's advice or not when they're making the final decision. And it was just very interesting to see the results that the participants took the task pretty seriously, whether to kill the enemies or not. The participants were pretty likely to follow the robot's suggestions in their decision making. And because this advice were random, unfortunately, this led them to make more mistakes in their decision when they follow the robot's suggestions. And in this study, the researchers were also very interested how human-like these robots were. Could be also a factor to how likely the people will follow the robot's suggestions. And very interestingly, it didn't matter that whether this robot was virtual robot, embodied robot, or even like just a box-shaped robot, and even whether this kind of box-shaped robot that was not even interactive. So it was actually giving the like advice to people just based on the text. People were still likely to follow AI's advice and change their decision. So the question is why people do that, why we do that, why we are likely to follow AI's decision when the decision, although this was simulated situation, it is very high stake decision, imagining that it is like a real military scenario. One of the researchers' explanation was that when the task is cognitively, emotionally demanding, like the decision that people had to make in this game to kill someone or not. Apparently, the human have more tendency to trust robot and AI with some motivations that they want to build trust with another teammate. I can see that we have this tendency wanting to make this decision together because it is really hard to do so by themselves, and also like somewhat shared responsibilities in that decision too. So kind of stretching that idea further, in psychology research, it's been shown very consistently that when people are stressed, it diminishes actually people's ability to think very clearly and critically and actually solve difficult, because it reducing the people's cognitive reserve, like ability to really think critically. So people may be more likely to make impulsive decisions or influenced by like other people's suggestions and other external cues. So knowing all these, the findings of this study and the human mind's tendency under stress, it wouldn't be very surprising for us to think that if the task is really high stake task, emotionally and cognitive challenging, the situation that can more often come up in military situations like policing, some situations in the court, medical diagnosis. It's also possible that we may be a bit more inclined to rely on AI suggestions because the task is very challenging. For example, I'm a junior doctor, I'm lacking all the experience, and making the medical diagnosis is very challenging. And it is also very, very important, high stake decision because it could also really influence my patient's outcome. It might be actually increasing our inclination to more rely on AI's suggestions, especially if we believe that AI is giving high quality suggestions. This is insight that I was gathering from the broader psychological literature. as well as more recent AI and robot specific literature. And I want to mention one more example how the stress can actually relate it to over reliance on AI. So other studies that I mentioned earlier at the beginning with workers who use ChatGPT regularly, and another study that was conducted last year with university students, when there are other types of stress, like there's high expectation on work productivity or their time pressure to finish certain work very quickly, like a deadline that's upcoming very soon, people report to over rely on AI. So, for example, have AI to generate the entire essay and without even checking, like submitting that work, for example. So, these other type of stress that are related to like time pressure, like workload, can I think also increase our tendency to over rely on AI and minimizing our motivations to think critically and do the work independently when the possibility to do that work very quickly with the minimal effort would be available at our fingertips. All right, putting together, I think these findings are providing us some warnings that we need to be more aware and conscious of these human tendency that when we're under stress, either because the task is very difficult or circumstances are providing us de-stress, like productivities or time pressure, we may be more likely to resort to AI and think less critically. And so we can watch out our own behaviors, but also this could happen among students or people that we work with. Because when it comes to the really high stake problems, right? And these are precisely the problems we want people to use their own independent thinking rather than just relying on AI. Medical decisions, court decisions, military decisions, and the impact of mistake can be really devastating depending on the severity of the situations. I think it's very important that society to be aware of the human tendency and thinking about some kind of preventions, especially for this type of situations, encouraging people to think more critically and in some ways preventing people to completely rely on the AI. That's all I want to share for now, briefly summarizing my understanding of the potential impact of stress on our decision making and also the tendency to rely on AI. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'll come back with another topic later. Bye.